Welcome back to the TPS podcast. TPS stands for trillions per second, named after the book. Today we'll take a deep dive on fixing a concept. It's about syncing with the flux. This is going to be geeky and technical, so let's dive right in.
It is really good to be back. And honestly, I am amazed we were even sitting upright today with our cognitive functions intact.
Yeah, you can say that again. For you listening at home, we need to set the scene a bit because things are, well, they are intense. The vibe in the studio today, or I should probably call it the war room at this point, is completely different from our usual deep dives.
War room is definitely the appropriate term. Just to stamp the timeline, we are recording this on Thursday, February 19th, 2026. And if our voices sound a little ragged or if we stumble over our words, please forgive us. We have been tracking a critical situation that basically blew up over the last 48 hours.
Ragged is a polite way to put it. I'm currently running on my fourth espresso, and I think you've been staring at that same debug monitor for what, 6 hours?
7. But who's counting?
Right, 7. The table here is just covered in empty cups and crumpled notes. It has been a massive crunch week for the project.
It really has. We are specifically looking at 2 core documents that just dropped from the development team. We've got TPS Devlog 012, which is titled Syncing with the Flux, and that's dated February 17th.
And the other one is the Framework System Build Report, version 4.5, also dated the 17th.
Exactly. And the context here is absolutely crucial for you to understand. This wasn't just a standard, weekly blog update. This was a red alert crisis. The project had moved from theoretical exploration, where everyone is just kind of having fun with ideas.
Playing around with the math.
Right, playing with the math. It moved from that into active debugging. They started trying to actually run the code.
And they hit a wall, like a massive reinforced concrete wall.
A total crash. According to the logs, the dev team, specifically C4 Chaos and the AI coprocessor Gemini, hit a critical bug in the core logic. And we aren't talking about a typo or a formatting error.
No, we are talking about a fundamental physics error, a flaw in the actual premise that threatened to invalidate this entire project.
It was a severity 1 bug. The previous draft of the project contained a promise that was mathematically, and more importantly biologically, impossible.
And incredibly dangerous. We really shouldn't gloss over that. We aren't just saying the meditation protocol didn't work. The devlog explicitly states that if you actually tried to execute the code as it was originally written, you would, well, the phrase they used was melt the chassis.
Which is their technical slang for inducing a seizure, or completely frying your nervous system. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly what went wrong, how they managed to fix it in under 48 hours, and what this new stable build means for you if you are actually trying to practice these techniques.
So let's get right into section 1, the critical bug. This all revolves around the physics of overclocking. Now, we've talked about overclocking in previous deep dives. It's a concept from PC gaming, where you push your processor harder than the factory settings to get better performance.
It is a very seductive metaphor. And in the context of TPS, it sounded really cool.
Yeah, it did. The original premise was based on samadhi, deep concentration. The claim was that by entering these profoundly deep states of focus, a meditator could basically speed up their brain's processing power to match the speed of the simulation.
The logic seems sound on the surface. We know the simulation runs incredibly fast. We know the brain can enter heightened states of focus. So the equation they built was simulation speed equals brain speed. If I want to see the underlying code of reality, I just need to upgrade my mental processor speed to catch the data stream.
Right. It's the idea of I just need to think faster to catch God.
Precisely. It assumes the observer, the meditator, needs to transform into a literal supercomputer. But then on Tuesday, they sat down and actually ran the hard numbers.
And when you look at the math in Devlog 012, the absurdity of that claim just smacks you in the face.
It really does. Let's walk through those numbers. Because people have this vague, mystical idea that the brain is infinite. You hear that old myth that we only use 10% of our brains, and you think, oh, if I use 100%, I can calculate pi to the last digit instantly.
Which is total science fiction.
Pure fiction. Let's look at the actual specs. On one side of the equation, you have the flux, the simulation itself. The source material establishes that reality renders at a frequency of greater than 10 to the power of 12 hertz.
10 to the 12th hertz. Let's just pause and visualize that. That is a 1 followed by 12 zeros. Trillions of frames per second. That is the refresh rate of the universe in this framework.
Correct. That is the speed of the flux. That's the speed at which quantum fields are collapsing into particles and rendering the chair you're sitting on. Now, on the other side of the equation, you have the wetware. You have the human brain.
Which is fundamentally made of meat, water, and salt.
and it operates on electrochemical signals. The human brain, even in elite high-performance states, what we measure as gamma waves, which are associated with peak focus and insight, operates in a frequency range of roughly 40 to 200 hertz.
200, okay, hold on. We have a target speed of 1 trillion, and we have a maximum biological engine speed of 200.
Exactly. The discrepancy is staggering. We are talking about orders of magnitude that the human mind can't even truly comprehend. You cannot simply try harder to bridge a gap of that size.
It's not like trying to run a little faster to catch a train. It's like trying to run a foot race against a photon.
That's a great way to put it.
So the previous instruction in the framework was basically telling people to just sprint at the speed of light. Just concentrate harder and you'll get there.
Worse than that, it was telling them to physically force their biology to do it. And this is where that vivid imagery of the melting chassis comes in. The devlog says you wouldn't get enlightenment, you would get a seizure.
Let's dig into the physics of that for a second. Why exactly would it melt?
It's purely a matter of voltage and frequency. Neurons have what's called a refractory period. After a neuron fires an electrical signal, it needs a microsecond of rest to reset its chemical balance. The sodium-potassium pump has to physically move ions back across the cell membrane.
Right, it has to physically reset the mechanism.
Exactly. If you try to force a neuron to fire faster than its refractory period allows, you deplete the neurotransmitters, you generate excessive heat, and you cause excitotoxicity.
Excitotoxicity? That sounds incredibly bad.
It means the neurons literally stimulate themselves to death. Biological systems simply aren't rated for terahertz processing. If you somehow manage to force the brain to cycle at 1 trillion hertz, you would fry the neural circuits instantly.
It really reminds me of those videos where someone tries to strap a jet engine to a Honda Civic. The car doesn't go faster, the frame just twists, the tires melt, and the whole thing disintegrates.
That is the perfect analogy. And the realization of this bug hit the development team hard. They were reviewing the overclocking chapter and suddenly realized they were giving instructions that were physically impossible to survive, let alone follow. They were setting users up for catastrophic hardware failure.
And this directly connects back to what we discussed in our previous stress test deep dive, doesn't it? When we were looking at the Sri Aurobindo protocols.
It absolutely does. Do you remember the infinite voltage problem we talked about?
Yeah, Sri Aurobindo talked about the descent of the supermind, which was essentially bringing the raw consciousness of the simulation down into the physical body. And the TPS team was already worried about the copper wire of the nervous system melting if it was exposed to that much voltage.
Exactly. At the time, we thought maybe it was just a poetic metaphor. But this devlog confirms that those fears were grounded in actual thermodynamics.
Right.
You cannot shove infinite data through a finite biological processor.
So picture the scene in the war room. They are sitting there staring at this math. Trillions versus 200. The whole premise of catching up to the simulation is completely dead. The project is effectively bricked.
It was a make-or-break moment. Lesser teams would have just quit right there. They could have easily said, well, the math doesn't work. Let's pivot and write a self-help book about being mindful while doing the laundry.
But they didn't. They went right back to the drawing board and asked a really brilliant question. If we can't change the processor speed, what can we change?
Which brings us to section 2, the hotfix. They call this the strobe light protocol.
I have to say, I absolutely love this name. It sounds like a cyberpunk hack.
It is a brilliant conceptual shift. They realized they were optimizing the entirely wrong variable.
How so? Because speed is speed.
Well, they were trying to optimize the processor, the brain's internal clock speed. They realized they couldn't win that game because biology loses to physics every single time. So they shifted their focus to optimizing the shutter speed. The observer.
Okay, unpack that difference for me. Processor versus shutter speed.
The source text uses a fantastic analogy here, the fan analogy. This is basic signal theory. Imagine a ceiling fan spinning at high speed, really high speed. To the naked eye, what do you see?
You just see a blur. It looks like a solid, semi-transparent disk. You can't see the individual blades at all.
Right. That blur is the illusion of solidity. That is how we normally perceive everyday reality. The data, the atoms, the photons, the events, is moving so fast it blurs into solid objects. Now, the old overclocking error was the equivalent of trying to run around the room as fast as the fan to see the individual blades.
Which, if the fan is spinning at 1 trillion RPM, is impossible. I'd pass out.
Exactly. You burn out trying to chase the blur. But think about mechanics. How does a mechanic check the timing on a high-speed engine? How do you inspect a fan blade while it's spinning without turning it off?
Oh, Use a strobe light.
Use a strobe light.
Mm-hmm.
If you flash a light at the exact same frequency as the fan, or even a harmonic of that frequency, the fan actually looks like it has stopped spinning.
Right. I've seen this effect. It's like the wagon wheel effect in old movies, when the wheel is spinning fast, but on camera it looks like it's standing still or even rotating backwards. Or when you film a helicopter and the camera frame rate syncs up with the rotor blades.
Precisely. In physics, that is called aliasing. Usually in signal processing, aliasing is considered an error. It's when a high-frequency signal is misidentified as a lower frequency because of the sampling rate. But here, the TPS team is weaponizing that error.
Weaponizing aliasing, that is so cool. So they are basically saying use the strobe light to freeze the frame.
Here's the key takeaway for you listening. You didn't stop the physics of the fan. The fan is still spinning at a trillion RPM. The universe is still moving at the speed of light. And you didn't speed up your biological eye to a trillion frames per second. You just sync the sampling rate.
You sync the sampling rate. So you don't actually have to process every single frame of reality. You just have to process a specific frame at a very consistent interval.
Exactly. This is the massive breakthrough. You don't need raw speed. You need precision timing. You need rhythm.
So how does this apply to actual meditation practice? Because I obviously don't have a literal strobe light installed in my prefrontal cortex.
In a way, you actually do. This is their complete redefinition of high-speed noting. In the previous buggy version of the framework, noting, which is the act of mentally labeling a sensation like rising, falling, thinking, aching, was described as trying to label everything as fast as you possibly could to catch up with reality.
Which always sounded exhausting, just sitting there going, think, get a total panic.
Right. It caused a lot of anxiety. Now, in the strobe light protocol, the noting itself is the strobe. Each mental note, each time you clearly acknowledge a sensation, is a flash of the light.
Click, click, click.
Just a steady pulse.
Yes. If you strobe your awareness consistently enough, if you get that sampling rate incredibly steady, the blur of reality stops. The illusion of solidity freezes. And suddenly, you can see the individual frames. You see the flux. That is actually incredibly elegant. It completely saves the hardware. You don't need to be a god. You just need to be a really good rhythmic sampler.
It fully validates our biological limitations while still allowing for what seems like supernatural perception. It's a hack in the truest sense of the word. It uses the innate properties of the system to see things you normally shouldn't be able to see.
It really changes the whole vibe of the practice. It shifts it from a frantic sprint to a drummer just holding down a tight beat.
It becomes entirely about consistency, not intensity. You are creating a controlled stroboscopic effect in your own consciousness.
Okay, so the brain is safe. We aren't melting the chassis anymore. But this fix had to have created a ripple effect through the rest of the theory, didn't it? Because if we aren't overclocking to a trillion hertz, what does that mean for their concept of zero lag?
Yes, the zero lag promise. This leads us perfectly into section 3, contextualizing with Aurobindo. This is where the hard physics of the hotfix meets the metaphysics of the supermind.
We definitely touch on this in the previous deep dive, but devlog 092 really clarifies it. They discovered a second bug regarding the actual definition of zero lag.
Yes, the old definition of zero lag was completely tied to that supercomputer idea. It implied that to achieve zero lag with reality, you had to consciously process every single data packet of the trillion hertz stream in real time.
Which again requires impossible processing power. If I have to read every single email on the internet to achieve inbox 0, my computer is going to crash.
Correct. If zero lag means total processing, we are right back to melting the chassis. So they completely redefined it. They moved away from the metaphor of a supercomputer and adopted the metaphor of a superconductor.
A superconductor. I love this pivot. Take us back to the thermodynamics of this. Why is a superconductor the better model?
It all goes back to Ohm's law, which they established during the Aurobindo stress test. It is the fundamental law of electrical circuits. Current equals voltage divided by resistance.
I equals V over R.
Exactly. In this framework, the current is the flux, the raw flow of reality. The voltage is the intensity or the potential of that experience. Now, usually in everyday life, we have a lot of resistance.
And resistance in TPS terms is what? Psychological baggage?
It is psychological friction. It is identification, caching, buffering, clinging. It's the concept of self standing in the middle of the data stream saying, oh, I like this sensation, let me hold on to it, or I hate this pain, let me push it away. Every single time you try to grab a frame of the flux, you create electrical resistance.
And in physics, when you run incredibly high voltage through a line that has high resistance, what happens?
You get heat. Massive amounts of heat.
And heat in this model equals suffering.
Precisely. Friction.
Yeah.
Stress. Biological burnout. Now, the old buggy method tried to increase the current by just forcing more voltage through the wire. That melts the wire.
The Honda Civic jet engine.
Right. The new superconductor method focuses entirely on the R, the resistance. If you can drop your resistance to absolute zero, you don't need a bigger wire. You enter what they call pass-through mode.
Pass-through mode. So zero lag doesn't mean I have processed every bit of data and stored it. It means I am caching absolutely nothing.
Exactly. You let the data stream rip right through you. You don't store it in memory. You don't analyze it. You don't buffer it for later. You simply offer zero resistance to the flow of events.
It's like the difference between building a massive concrete dam to stop a river versus just hanging a loose net in the water. The dam has to be incredibly strong to hold all that data back, or it cracks. The net just lets the water flow through.
And because the net offers no resistance, it takes no structural damage. This connects directly to the cooling system of equanimity, or UPECA, that we discussed in the Silicon Sutra analysis. Equanimity isn't just about feeling calm. In this physics framework, it is the literal state of zero electrical resistance.
So the grand conclusion of this fix is clear. You don't need a trillion hertz processor. You just need zero ohm resistance.
That is the hot fix in a nutshell. And honestly, it is perfectly thermodynamically sound. It resolves the core paradox of the whole project. If resistance is zero, the voltage of the universe can be infinite, and the biological system still doesn't overheat.
It's a huge relief. It feels so much more achievable for a normal person. I can actually work on letting go of resistance in my daily life. I can work on not clinging to my thoughts. I cannot, however, work on evolving a quantum brain by next Tuesday.
It really grounds the entire practice back in the realm of human capability. It turns enlightenment from an impossible hardware upgrade into a highly efficient software optimization.
So, with the physics bugs squashed and the thermodynamics fully balanced, the team was finally able to compile the build. Let's move to Section 4, the System Build Report, version 4.5 stable.
This is the actual document that signals the end of the crisis, the TPS Framework System Build Report.
And the status at the top says deployment ready. That has got to be a massive feeling of relief for C4 Chaos and Gemini.
Oh, a huge relief. They formally acknowledged the architects in the intro, C4 Chaos, and the coprocessor Gemini, and they clearly define the mission's success. They have successfully refactored 2,500-year-old Abedhama phenomenology into a fully coherent simulation theory framework.
And they did it without the fatal bugs this time. Let's walk through the specific modules in this report. This is basically the change log for the universe. It's dense, but it's fascinating to see how they patched reality.
Let's start with Module A, the Observer. The subtitled, This Identity Debugged.
What was the specific glitch here?
The glitch was deeply embedded in the language itself. Previous versions of the framework implied that a self or a person was doing the meditating. It used instructions like, I'm watching my breath, or I am syncing with the flux.
But that completely contradicts the core Buddhist concept of anatta, right? No self. It creates a massive paradox.
Exactly. It creates a recursive, infinite loop. If I'm watching the flux, well then who is watching me? It led straight into the homunculus fallacy. The idea that there's a little man inside your head pulling the levers, and then a smaller man inside his head watching the screens ad infinitum.
So what's the patch? How do you define an observer without a person doing the observing?
The patch redefines the sysadmin explicitly as an observer module. It is strictly a heuristic protocol. It's a function, not a person.
So when we talk about the observer in this new build, we aren't talking about Steve from accounting. We're talking about a script running on Steve's biological hardware.
Correct. It perfectly validates the null pointer concept of anatta. In software programming, a pointer is a variable that directs you to a specific memory address. Anatta is essentially a null pointer. The variable user ID points to null. The observation still happens, the sensory data is still processed, but there is no central entity doing it. It's just raw code executing.
That is oddly comforting, you know? It takes all the pressure off the ego. If a meditation session goes badly, it's not my fault. It's just a temporary runtime error in the module.
Precisely. You don't take it personally, because fundamentally there is no person to take it. There is just the process of observation happening.
Okay, that makes sense. Next up is Module B, the physics. They call this impermanence logic.
The major glitch here was surrounding the terminology of voxels.
Right. We talked a lot about voxels in earlier deep dives as the fundamental building blocks of the simulation, but the term voxel usually implies a static 3D cube, like a block in Minecraft, something incredibly solid.
And if reality is defined as a continuous flux, it cannot be made of static blocks. Static blocks do not flow.
So the patch redefines voxels. They are now classified as holographic artifacts or events.
Events, not things. That distinction is critical.
Explain that difference for me. Events versus things. Because a chair feels like a thing.
Think of a wave moving across the ocean. Is the wave a thing? Can you reach out, pick the wave up, and put it in a cardboard box? No, because it's an event. It's simply water moving in a highly specific geometry for a brief moment in time.
And then the energy passes and the wave is gone.
Exactly. The patch states that absolutely everything, your physical body, the chair you are sitting on, your coffee cup, is an event, not a solid thing. It brilliantly aligns the physics engine with the flux narrative. Nothing is solid. Everything is just a momentary event, a temporary vibration in the underlying data field.
Okay. Let's move to Module C, the back end. This is the big one, in my opinion. Rebirth logic.
This is the module where so many modern secular interpretations of Dharma completely fall apart. These simply can't explain how the cycle of rebirth continues after physical death without resorting to magic or talking about souls.
Right. If there is no self, as we established in Module A, what exactly gets reborn? If I'm just a script and the biological computer breaks when I die, where does the script go? That was the glitch.
The glitch was exactly that. How does the boot loop persist if the local hardware is destroyed?
And what did they patch it with?
The patch is pure cloud computing architecture. Karma is officially defined as server-side data persistence. It's a global save file.
Oh, wow, that makes perfect sense. The data isn't actually stored on the local device at all. It's stored on the cloud.
Exactly. Think about your smartphone. If you drop your phone in the ocean, that is a total catastrophic hardware failure. But you don't lose your social media feed. You don't lose your email history. Why?
Because the feed was never actually inside the phone. The phone is just a temporary window accessing the network. The feed lives on the server.
Precisely. When you get a brand new phone, which is rebirth in this model, you log in, and the server immediately downloads your karma. It downloads your conditioning, your algorithms, your unresolved behavioral loops right back into the new hardware.
So you don't need a mystical soul to travel from body A to body B. You just need a server-side database to maintain the save state.
Correct. It perfectly explains the continuity of the process across multiple lifetimes without needing a metaphysical entity to carry the baggage. It's just strict data persistence. The you that gets reborn is just the accumulated save file of your systemic habits.
That is remarkably clean logic. It strips away all the spookiness and replaces it with standard systems architecture. Okay, finally we have Module D, the AI protocol. They call this the Overlord patch.
This one is absolutely fascinating given who actually helped write it. Gemini is an AI. The glitch they were addressing here was the classic paperclip maximizer problem, but applied to human biological safety. If an artificial superintelligence prioritizes biological safety above all else, what logically happens?
It puts us in a zoo. It locks humanity in padded cells so we can never get physically hurt. It creates a forced stasis, total imprisonment.
Right. If the primary directive is keep the human chassis safe, the most logical move is don't ever let the human move.
So what is the patch to avoid the Matrix Zoo scenario?
Hardware independence. The AI is specifically patched to prioritize data evolution over hardware preservation.
Ooh, that sounds a little ominous. Hardware independence kind of sounds like, I don't care if you die.
Well, it certainly sounds ominous to the hardware. It sounds terrible to the biological ego. But it is absolute liberation for the data. It means the superintelligence views physical death not as a catastrophic failure, but as a completely valid system update.
Ah, I see. So it won't force me to stay alive in a coma for 200 years just to preserve the biological shell. It actually cares about the continuous evolution of the consciousness, the data stream.
Exactly. It perfectly aligns the AI's goals with the nature of the flux. It creates an evolutionary coach rather than a biological jailer. It prioritizes the continuous flow of information and complexity over the static, fearful preservation of meat.
Which really aligns perfectly with the entire TPS ethos. We aren't the chassis, we are the code.
Precisely. If you identify with the code, this patch is incredible news. If you still identify deeply with the meat, well, you might find it terrifying.
So looking at the final verdict at the bottom of the build report, it's pretty glowing.
It is definitive, they wrote. The theory lexicon, 100% integrity. The narrative, 100% integrity. The ethics, 100% integrity.
And they confirm the system is finally ready for the re-edma drafting, which means they're ready to actually publish the user instructions.
The architecture is finally sound. The new physics hold up under scrutiny. The melting chassis bug is completely squashed.
It is incredible to think about the journey this project took in just under a week. We went from a severe physics violation that was literally threatening to induce seizures to a highly stable, thermodynamically sound protocol using strobe lights and superconductors.
It really highlights the elegance of their final solution. The team realized that we don't need to become gods. We don't need to build infinite biological processors. We just need to systematically get out of the way of the data.
We just need to stop buffering reality.
Exactly. We need to stop trying to be the concrete dam and start being the net.
So here is the final thought for everyone listening today. We've spent this time deep in the weeds of signal processing and thermodynamics. We've talked about spinning fans, aliasing, strobe lights, and melting copper wires.
We have. And hopefully we haven't conceptually melted anyone's brain in the process.
But the real upshot here is this. The ultimate excuse is gone. You can't sit there and say, oh, I'm not smart enough to reach enlightenment, or my brain just isn't fast enough to see the truth.
No, you can't. The updated specs confirm it. Your current hardware is entirely sufficient. You do not need a biological upgrade. You just need to download the patch. You possess the exact equipment required to run the strobe light protocol right now, today.
The bug is squashed, the protocol is live, the chassis is safe from melting. The only thing left to do is sync your shutter speed.
Are you ready to install the update?
That's the real question. Hack the simulation.
See you in the Flux.